So let's get into a little bit of what crises are. I'm going to make this a pretty short lecture, but I do want to emphasize it because I think this is extremely important to get this right off the bat here. And we're going into a very small definition of what crisis is and then an expansion of it. So crisis has to do with three major variables per Herman 1963. Very old, but at the same time still very relevant. It is a surprise, it's a threat, and it needs a short response time. So let's start there. So we get into the definition of crisis within these three things. So surprise, obviously, something has happened that we may not have expected. It's out of the status quo for how we do things. So it can be internal or external. This is a major facet here, to where it could be an employee that does something very wrong. That's still a surprise because you would sit there and go, why would an employee do something very wrong? Uh, I can think of one example right off the bat, which is actually this goes through gaming. So if you're not a gamer, I'm sorry. I'm going to use this example first and foremost. New game that's coming out, Last of Us 2. A disgruntled employee leaked gaming information before it was released. So there was a lot of spoilers, and this particular brand was like, this sucks because part of what makes gaming storytelling or any storytelling really good is that there are no spoilers before it comes out and everybody gets this authentic experience as it goes along. However, this didn't happen because somebody in the developmental team, which I think who were fired or let go in some capacity, decided to leak this information, and so this is a surprise. And it's not only that; it is now a threat. It is a problem that people that are either within the organization, are stakeholders within the organization, and I'll get to that in a second, or general public that may not be interested at all, but now are very interested in terms of what you're doing. You might not have something that is very important to somebody until it is. So first and foremost, we talk about these things in what is a stakeholder. Stakeholder is, and I'll probably go over this definition a couple times. Stakeholder is somebody that has investment in your organization, whether it be financial or identity. Think about it in the capacity of if something bad happens to Appalachian State, they have a negative connotation to their reputation. We are all affected as U.S. students, as me as faculty, as Melissa as staff. We all suffer a little bit because of this reputation, and it can also be good things. So, everybody talks about when we beat Michigan, we are known for that. Like, people still talk about that, even though I'm like, we're going on almost 2 decades. As far as 2027, it will have been 2 decades since that happened. So please, we beat UNC in University of South Carolina. So we've been doing bigger things since then, but it is this notion of how you're known and how your social identity is affected in this case. So it is a threat, and it also takes a short response time, which means if a crisis happens, you have no choice but to respond to it. You have no choice but to play your part in the game of bringing out whatever it is that you need to say about it. This is really important for a lot of organizations. Excuse me. Is how do we move on past that? And there are hundreds of examples, but one of my favorite ones in terms of short response time was there was an example in the 80s of Pepsi, and Pepsi had an issue where, and this is horrific when you think about it, is somebody found a syringe in their can of Pepsi, which, I can't think of anything more horrifying to find in a can of Pepsi than finding this syringe. So this is a big story. It came all across the news, and Pepsi, in this case, is like, we don't know what the hell happened. This is before social media, way before social media. So they have to sit there and go, we don't know what the hell happened here. What we'll do is we'll comply. We'll go over all the footage. The good thing is with this can, it has identifiers about when it was canned, how it goes through the process. And so they went through video evidence of every single little place that it could have gone to. And it turns out it was all elaborate hoax. So the fact that Pepsi was honest, the fact that they were compliant, the fact that when they eventually found out everything was just a complete hoax by a person that just wanted a lot of money. It was very much found out, and where public perception was that people praised Pepsi in this case, where they said, actually, I'm going to start buying Pepsi more because of how they handled this. They were honest, and they worked really well with the authorities in terms of uncovering this, because I think it was a full-scale FBI investigation, if memory serves me correctly. So let's go into it expanded. So we have surprise, threat, and short response time. But as we get into a more expansive definition, it's unexpected, it's non-routine. The procedures, it produces uncertainty, which we'll get into that, creates opportunity, and it's a threat to image, reputation, and goals. So probably a lot of that you're all aware of. One thing I want to focus on is this idea of produces uncertainty. I don't know if you've ever seen the movie The Dark Knight. It's probably a favorite DC movie of mine, at least, where the Joker is talking to Harvey Dent in a hospital, and he says that everybody is okay as long as things are going according to plan. However, when one little cog goes out of the wheel, everybody loses their mind about something because it's not according to the plan anymore. Oh gosh, I jokingly say, I was like, Joker is one of the best media scholars because he understands crisis so well. Is that there's a lot of uncertainty, and we are very, very, very uncomfortable with uncertainty. We want to know what, why, how, when, etc. Who, and I can speak on personal experience about that a little bit because I helped work with an online newspaper at Virginia Tech a year after the shooting had happened. And there's still, at that point, a lot of uncertainty for how people felt. There was a lot of news reporters. We talked quite extensively about what it was like that day. And if you watch the news reports for a lot of that within that particular shooting, and by the way, we're going to talk a lot about a lot of uncomfortable topics. So I do want to issue kind of trigger warnings as we go along here. This was an interesting thing within crisis communication because there was so much that wasn't known when it happened or why it was done, and people were like, why? Why did this happen? Why did this occur? Who did it? And all these questions. And all the police chief at the time could say is, we don't know. We're not sure. We'll get back to you. And that's all you could say because you don't want to give misleading information. But the problem with that is it's always uncertain. So this goes back to that short response time when it comes to crisis communication. There is a theory within communication. It's called uncertainty reduction theory. And this is very much a part of it. Anytime that you're uncertain about something, many people are very uncomfortable with it. So there are very few people that are very comfortable with being in a case of uncertainty. I always use the example of if somebody sits next to you on the apple cart, just randomly, let's say like there's nobody else in the bus, it's just you, and then this next person comes into the bus and they sit down right next to you. My first thought process is, why would somebody do that? I might even get in this area of inquisition where I'm like, can I help you? Perfectly acceptable thing to do, just sit down on the bus in a way that you just sit right next to the person, even though there's no space. But there are norms to where it's not usual. It's not usual that somebody would do this. And so I would ask questions. I would try to gain to the bottom of why would somebody sit next to me? This is kind of a trivial example, but it does get into the point where we don't like that uncertainty. We don't like being kept in the dark. So we constantly want to know information as it progresses. So this is kind of your first best practices is keeping people within the loop when crises occur. So there are types of crisis, and I'll kind of go through them slowly. There's terrorism, sabotaging, things like workplace violence, poor employee relationships, poor risk management. Again, that's something before it actually occurs. So, kind of bringing to light a problem before it even happens. A hostile takeover, unethical leadership. And then there's also unintentional times, which are natural disasters, disease outbreak, which, obviously we're kind of in the middle of, unforeseen technical interactions, product failure, and, a downturn in the economy. The last thing I'll mention about some of these types and where a crisis comes in is, we are in the middle of a pandemic and it is affecting a lot of things outside of what we do. Obviously, we're now granted this would have been, well, actually, crisis calm. No, I mean to think now. No, 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 no. I signed this up for an online class this year, but um, you know, this is the kind of thing where online classes, especially at the end of last semester, had to be a norm, and for a lot of people that produced a lot of discomfort. Uh, we really missed this face to face interaction, but that was something that was one outcome of it. Whereas a lot of people they lost their jobs, and the economy suffered in a lot of ways that people couldn't go into places. I mean, Boone in general is a very tourist driven place, and so tourism is a massive part of our economy. So having this, it hurts one way. Any way you look at it, it hurts in terms of how that's done. But how you manage the situation here in very innovative ways really can go to show how you adapt and how you bring things together. So there are a lot of businesses, especially restaurants, that were like, let's keep our kitchens open. One thing that people need right now is a good meal. And if, they're sick of cooking at home, we want to be able to provide for that. So, if people want to come to our restaurant, they can pick up curbside. And it was really cool of how people got innovative when this occurred as much as they possibly could. Of if there was something wrong, we were going to handle it in a way that best suited the way that we could control it. So, one thing I want you to think about over the weekend, this isn't homework or anything, but I want you to think about this in a broad sense, is how do people adapt when things go wrong? So, in the case of COVID-19, how did businesses take a monumental kick in terms of the things that they do, that things were ruined for a lot of them? How did they adapt? How did they rebuild their image on something that it's not even their fault? Now, there are things that they could control within COVID-19, but there were a lot of things that they couldn't control. And because of that, they have to figure out methods and ways to do so appropriately and do so in a way that's safe to the public, as well as their employees. So, this is actually a big conversation point that I'll talk about next week in that case about how this works. But think about that. What are some innovative ways that you've seen that people have adapted within crises? And that's one of the best ways to talk about how, when I went into the expansive definition, that it might be seen as an opportunity. You might be able to do something really cool. Netflix, for instance, turned it into an opportunity to do watch parties. It's this idea of social connection that we love so much as a human species, that we craved it. And so being able to have that within having watch parties on Netflix really was a good way to bring people together in that case. So anyway, that's just a basic definition. We'll get into a little bit more of issue and risk for next week. Until then, make sure to look on As You Learn, kind of keep updated on things. If you have any questions, please let me know. I will not be holding office hours tomorrow, but I will starting next week. I'll send a Zoom out for everybody to know. So anyway, I hope you all have a wonderful day. Happy 4th of July, everybody. And I will see you next week. Take care.